Still good morning. It's not yet good afternoon. Fine. Everybody can hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Well, Siddharth, thank you. Basically, our discussion is how effective games are in education. And I would like to start by opening a question. I need to talk a bit. I'm sure Siddharth will understand me. We cannot compress everything in few minutes, especially that we have more than 20 years of experience in education and in games. However, long story short, what makes games fun? In reality, what parents don't like to hear, what makes them addictive? What makes them engaging? What makes them submerging? That suspension of disbelief that we create in games. How can we translate all that into education? Now, is it fun and educational, or educational then fun? Now, most probably, if we approach a student as it's educational and then fun, there is no more fun in it anymore. It's education. And we all know education is serious, and being serious, it's not about fun. To make the long story short, about how games are engaging, how do we create the suspension of disbelief? A short description about my past experience. I worked for Nintendo for about 10 years, and worked on the development of games like Mario, like Yoshi, Donkey Kong, Tetris, of course the small pocket monsters. What makes these games attractive? We work with a subject matter expert.
The video guys, you know.
In our case,
you don't use my age, you cannot record.
In our who cannot hear me?
Sorry, it's for the recording.
Ah, the corner. Okay. Well, I hate microphone. Anyway, so in our case, when we have a successful game, and like Siddharth said, out of 10 games we used to develop at Nintendo, 2 will see the light. Maybe 1 will be successful. 8, no one will ever hear about them, ever. We don't want even to talk about this failure. Okay? So what makes a game successful is the subject matter expert in fun, in addiction. Now, if you want to translate the success to education, whenever we produce an educational game, are we bringing a subject matter expert in education to be part of the development? Are the teachers themselves who are delivering the educational content through a game, are they computer savvy themselves? Do they understand the technology the way the subject matter experts who build a successful game do? So this is basically the question that I'm asking, because mostly what I see so far, it's the extensive and killing, thank you Siddharth, the extensive and overkilling usage of 3D to deliver a context that simply a text would do. However, for me, the way we can use simulation for education, it's how we can get better experience in class. Sometimes we have topics where whenever we have a simulation, it's much easier to explain, like physics, geometry, trigonometry. But how can we use 3D for English? It's much better if you use text, maybe interactive text. I'm not an expert, but I don't see overkilling the 3D usage in education. Anyway, before I take all the time, because believe me, I can. Before I take all the time, the challenges that we have currently is how effective education in games is. And most importantly, being responsible for one of the universities in Singapore and in the US, and also as a director for one of the high school programs, one of the first questions I ask, how credible your game is? Can I use it? And if I use it, how can I metric the success? Did the student do the project? Who is playing that game? A group or a particular? What kind of grades do I give? So this is the first question I ask as a school responsible. Anyway, like I said, I can keep on talking. So now I will give the microphone to the panelists.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wai Man. Just a show of hands, how many of you have played Pac-Man before? Well, we're all in the same generation, I guess. Those who have not raised hands, I'm sure you're quite alien to Pac-Man, right? It's one of those games we play as a young kid, and we play many, many hours on it. Now, running forward to the current time, how many of you have played Kinetics, Xbox Kinetics? Well, quite a few as well, not that many. So there's still a lot of room to catch up. Connect, yeah. Xbox Connect. So there's still a lot of room to catch up here. And what I'm trying to say is that the game industry has changed a lot. I think playing Pac-Man itself has got a lot of values, even though it's such a simple game. You just chase a monster around and try to gobble them up. But there's a lot of strategies, a lot of thinking, a lot of problem solving, and of course, a lot of dexterity in terms of your hands and your eye movement. So those are good things about gaming. Now Xbox has got Kinect, and it's a whole new way of looking at games. You can now teach dancing via a computer, which was quite impossible just a few years ago. And if you have watched young children dance, right, you can imagine if they're going to be good at this dancing, right, they can make a living out of it just by playing games. Now, in terms of educational games, there are a lot of challenges. One of which is that our parents tell us not to play games. I'm sure you have heard about this before, right? Don't play games, don't play computer games. Because they always think that computer games tends to dumb you down. Why do they say that? They dumb you down. Because when they play games, right, you're not reading, you're not writing, you're not doing math, you're not thinking, you're not doing problem solving. You're just addicted to the game. And there's a serious concern for a lot of parents. But today's games have changed a lot. And listening to Sue this morning, she mentioned about these game elements, about challenge, risk, emotion, problem solving, and so on and so forth. These are all the educational strategies that have been embedded in games. And I think this is really good. Adult learners, which I'm partly involved in, training adults, they're so focused on work, and they have no time to play. But this gives them the opportunity to engage in games while learning at the same time. And from the US, we can see that a lot of corporates now going to gaming. IBM, for my example, right, has been using their process software to teach their products as well as engage learners in solving problems at the workplace. So there's a lot of opportunities for gaming as well for adult learners. So going forward, personally, I see there's a very strong need to build this industry, both for the preschool, in the school, and also for the adult working workforce. And I think with all this technology now in place, right, mobile learning, the digital technologies, Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth, you can now play games outside of workplace, at the same time learn a skill, learn a competency, and be able to build those competencies for a period of time. So imagine now I'm new to serious gaming. I want to be a game developer. It's still not too late for me. I can still learn online. I can still engage in gaming, learn the strategies, and at the same time build games, as what Siddha has mentioned, through the hiving method. I can build games, right, and engage others in my process as well. So personally, I see a lot of opportunities, and hopefully we can engage more people in this process. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for those comments. I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Inder Raj, and I'm back from Mumbai. I'm working for a startup called Wai Learning Solutions. I'll start off with a very basic perspective on the K-12 segment. Now, if you have to make a game for kids, some of the points that Mr. Samra pointed out in his comments was about reviewing as well as assessment. And the second one was related to teaching. Now, if people have got pens and papers over here, we can do a small exercise. And I'll show you how you can make a game which is doing a reviewing exercise. It is also teaching you something, and you can port it to multiple platforms and make it more engaging. So how many of you, if you have got iPads or pens which you can just use for some time over here? Okay, you can start off by noting these 9 numbers randomly on your piece of paper. These numbers are, should I begin by announcing them? These numbers are 3, 5, 20, 4, 25, 15, 12, 30, and 9. Okay, let's say these are bubbles moving around on your screen. And the step 1 is to identify all the multiples of 3. So you can start off with that. Identify all the multiples of 3 and mark 1 star around them. If everyone's done, I can move to the next level. The next would be identify all the multiples of 5 and mark another star around them. Okay, this part of the game would actually test you whether you know how multiples can be done or not. The next part would be that identify all the numbers which have now got 2 stars, which represent the common multiples, and now find out the least common multiple amongst them. How many of you have got the answers? I know it's a very silly question to ask over here. So basically my point was that in such kind of a design, you can actually start off by having a small assessment, which will be based on some earlier concept, which was multiples. And then you can teach him how you can actually find the least common multiple by playing a game. Now, the point that Mr. Samra mentioned about engaging and interactivity, imagine the same game being played on Connect with bubbles floating all around with these numbers. And the child has to actually tap on these numbers and finish the game and identify the least common multiple. Now, this is like a very good encapsulation of the concept of LCM into a very engaging kind of format. And let's take it a bit further. What if it's a multiplayer game with two children competing against each other on a Kinect platform, and they're playing the same game wherein they're supposed to tap bubbles, and the classroom is sitting behind and cheering them in groups. Now that would get the entire classroom to engage on one particular platform. They're playing a very small concept, and none of them is going to find them very serious in the sense. So this is the way actually we can, the entire concept was actually developed by speaking to a lot of educational scientists and a lot of the teachers, and that is why I brought this over here, because it actually resolves the issues that we have about how you engage a computer scientist, how you get a serious game developer, how you actually get a champion in a subject onto a particular platform, and how you actually get the kids to play the game and learn the entire concept. So yeah, this is what I had to speak about as an example. I won't be giving a lot of comments on strategies and everything, because I'm sure there are more experienced people who will be speaking on that over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Raymond here. My previous background is 12 over years in teacher education with National Institute of Education, Singapore. I'm a non-gamer. The only time I played games was during my girls' time, when they're young and they're playing like a Pac-Man and they're playing like a Mario kind of games. So that's about that. And even at the age of being a teenager, not me being a teenager, but my girls being a teenager, it's surprising that they can still fall back on simple games like Mario, those kind jump up and down getting the cherries and all those, you see. And it's fun. So I always ask myself, you know, what is it that even at their age as a teenager, they still go back to it and still want to play with that? So what I'm trying to say is the teaching and learning environment is important. Understanding it is important. What does it mean? Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about science experiments, the science lab. Without games, without technology, the usual kind of science lab will be that you have the hands-on experiments, right? And then let's move on to the next stage. If we talk about using IT, we talk about virtual labs. And that's where you can, you know, either in the form of CD-ROMs or it can be online, and you can play many times, right? And you can make mistakes, you have the risks, you have the challenges, but that's about it. Then the next thing, what will then the next thing be? I would say the next thing will be the next level where they can make certain decisions, all right? They can have different scenarios, and that's where maybe I see the potential of serious games coming in, all right? And I'm glad that you talk about the hiving, the pedagogy, because it is important that there has to be some form of pedagogy behind whatever that is, whether it's going to be serious games, all right, or whether that is going to be something you're going to learn or going to teach. The pedagogy behind it is critical. So it's not just game developer, it's not just subject matter expert, it is not just instructional designer, all coming in together. The pedagogy behind it that anchors that element, it is important. So perhaps from this virtual lab, it can move to the next level where you can have the game element in and you have the pedagogy behind it. All right? And with that, for example, in Marshall Cavendish, all right, instead of products, we provide solutions. Behind the solution is the pedagogy. For example, we have this 4C framework, which actually lead to a beginning understanding, all right, that will then come out to develop or build up the understanding, reinforcing the understanding, and applying the understanding. And that has been successful and is evidence-based. So it will be quite interesting to apply that. I'm thinking maybe behind serious games pedagogy, all right, the 4C framework, that will be quite interesting. Because we talk about games being effective. Effective in what areas? Because when we talk about a teaching tool, what exactly that we want it for? Skills, processes, concept. What is it that we want? All right? And then with that, we have the pedagogy behind it, and then we design it, and with the game elements. So when we talk about engaging, when we talk about interactive, the word engaging means different to different people, right? So how are you going to cater that to a diverse classroom? Of course, we talk about differentiated instruction, all right? The challenge is, can we have differentiated instruction in the serious games? This is another way to consider. Thank you.
Thanks. So just a bit of background. My name is Jonathan. Prior to being in academia, I was in industry for about 6-7 years, and then now in academia for about 7 years. So I think I think what was really interesting, Samir, you brought up this thing about fun, the anchor of fun. I remember my first experience of working on a serious game was basically doing it for a bank. And the idea was basically to get people to invest money in their bank. So we made a game, right or wrong, but we made a game, and basically it was operant conditioning, right? So it was meant to change the behavior of the users to say, well, we will put more money into our savings in this particular account. The prelude to developing this game, though, was we wanted it to be quick and we wanted it to be fun. So as many of the people in the bank could play it and then use it. Of course, after the whole thing, I think what happened was the bank asked us if this was successful. And of course, at that point, from my experience, we could see, yes, it was successful because after playing this game, X number of people signed up. Of course, there was no scientific research at that point about that. Fast forward now into academia where I am in. And I think one of the things that has really struck me recently, like unlike my experience in the bank where we were talking to the people in the bank and there was just one client, I think for games and learning specifically, our client is a bit different because now we have the parents, the teachers, and the students. So the students obviously want the element of fun, and that's something that we start with. The parents want the element of success because they want to see that if their kid has done this, they have achieved this. What's also interesting is that teachers are on both sides. They say, well, the kids can have a bit of fun, but what's important is, can I measure after they have had that fun whether they have met the learning outcomes? So I think one of the things from my experience that is now coming up a lot more is the measurement of this. So the measurement of the learning outcomes, can we measure that? And I think that's one of the areas that even for myself I'm looking at in terms of, if the kid has had fun, he has played the game, how do we then measure and assess that this has happened and it's successful? Yep, that's all.
Questions from the audience? We can't see. See, this is, for example, sorry about that, organizers, but this is an example how a game cannot be fun.
How much in-class time is proper for educational game play?
Somebody is missing. Okay.
The question is, how much in-class time is proper for in-classroom play, educational game play?
Somebody would like to?
I spent a lot of years in the polytechnics and universities as academic. I think to answer this question, it has to be 100%. 100% of play. But this play is serious play. It's not just fun, right? Because we know our learners now, they're not able to focus on just reading textbooks. They want multiple ways of learning. And I think gaming is one of them. Of course, the game doesn't have to be a computer-based game, right? It can be a role-based game. It can be cardboard games. It can be outdoor adventure games. It can be collaborative games over the internet. So if we can build gaming into the classroom, right, and out of the classroom as well, I think the learning outcomes will certainly be much more improved. A lot of our children are very stressed up in examinations, especially in Singapore. And the last thing they want to do is to go to class and listen to someone speak. I think they learn more by engaging in game. And this is happening now for preschool, right? There are a lot of preschools now embedding games into the learning. There's no assessment, there's no homework, but they go to a preschool, they play the whole day. At the end of the day, they will have learned something. In fact, they will learn something. So we asked me this question, I think we need to change our mindset and make 100% game play, right, as a class time. And this, of course, goes well for other schools and universities as well. Encourage more games, and I think it will encourage more learning.
I'll just add on to one point that Sir mentioned over here. He mentioned that the current generation is not thinking in a very structured manner. All the activities that we do are very haphazard. Like, we have a lot lesser attention span, and this is probably why we see a lot of people using apps, because you can just resume them anytime you want. Now, the reason why I agree with Sir's point over here that it should majorly be games is because if you make an engaging game and it has elements which are going to bring up surprises, it would keep the learners engaged all throughout the lecture period, rather than having a delivery in the voice format wherein even people like me have dozed off. So as I'm sure the next generation is going to be even more unstructured, even more random in their thinking process. So that is why I think games can bring in that surprise elements and keep them interested all throughout the lecture. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Okay. I have a question. I'm sorry, this is slightly contentious. It's just, but it's an actual genuine question. You know, we talked about a large proportion of classroom time being dedicated to games. Experience has shown, that games actually take more time to deliver the same amount of content that other media take. If I was just going to read out something to you, the amount of time that I would take to just read it out would be less than the amount of time a game would take to expose the same amount of content to you. If the amount of classroom time, if all of the classroom time is actually dedicated to games, how do you cope for the need for extended classroom hours? Right? Because the amount of curriculum that has to be delivered in most cases to a standard of education remains the same. So if you increase the number of games that children need to be played, this is to the whole panel.
Or do you think that curriculum needs to be reduced?
So that would be a taboo.
I will answer quickly your question. How to reduce the curriculum? As a matter of fact, we need to enlarge it. Nowadays, our life is getting more complicated, and our kids need to learn even more. So we need to find ways how to compare more education into the limited time that they have.
Yeah. So if I think what you brought up was really interesting. I think it's not one of the biggest considerations, I think, in using games in the first place is the difference between surface learning and the depth of learning, right? So obviously, if you're saying that when I invest in using game as part of my curriculum, the investment is that there is a deeper sense of learning within this. And I don't think it's also a matter of, like what somebody say, reducing content, because the content would still need to be the same. I think in relation, that's why we have a lot more classrooms moving beyond the physical classroom. And we have a lot of learning that happens outside of the classroom and through online and whatnot. Yeah.
I need to respond to this question because I guess I opened up a can of worms here. Right? Now, the whole curriculum has to be restructured. We cannot go by learning outcomes, one learning outcome, one game, another learning outcome, another game. You need to approach it at a holistic level. Just for a show of hands, how many of you played this game called Where in the World is Carmen San Diego? Yeah? Okay, good. It is a game that covers a lot of curriculum areas. It's about geography, it's about history, it's about traveling, it's about so many things, like communication included. And it's all covered within one game. So in that one game, they covered like 10 areas of the curriculum. And at the end of the day, whether you can solve the problem or not, it tells you how much you apply all those areas to the curriculum. So I think our schools have to restructure the way they embrace the curriculum and deliver the content to the students. No more one subject per hour, per class, whatever, right? It's one game covering all these areas, and this game will be evolved through a period of time in the school, right? Could be over a 6-month period. As you play this game, they'll learn. I think Canberra School is one of those evidence that we are seeing now. I was from Canberra Primary School, by the way, many years ago, right? And I can relate to what they are doing there. Right? I think it is really a good thing for them to get into this way of teaching and engaging learners. So no more one curriculum, one game, but really holistically managing those together, right?
Okay, sorry. I think fundamentally it is still back to this basic question, all right? Your intent of using the game. So it's the same thing, just like video. We have video all the way from the start of the classroom lesson to the end. Same as from the start to the end, we use games. Right. So the question is, again, the basic question. What is the intent of that if I call it resource, or the resource that you want to use, be it games or even the video? Is it to engage, to motivate, or what? To bring about certain processes of inquiry, if you're talking about science? So again, back to that basic question. If you're clear about that basic question, then perhaps you will know which right game to use. And of course, then which right game, then that will depend on whether that game is ready-made or a lot of money pumping that will be customizing it for that purpose. Right? So again, that is the fundamental, right? How you want to use it. And of course, the next thing is, which I do find sometimes lacking, is the connection. The connection back to that resource that you use, whether it's going to be a video or a game. All right? You need to be connect it back, the understanding of that concept or the idea. Because a lot of time, for example, in a typical classroom situation, the teacher uses, for example, the video. Everybody get hyped up. Wow, this is fantastic, they enjoy. And after which, something else. Not well connected back to that video. Then the student will be asking, why do I watch that video? I mean, I cannot connect to it. There's no linkage. So the same thing if we use games, all right, there has to be some connection back to that game. So which means, if the teacher were to use that game, the teacher, him or herself, had to understand the meaning of that game. For what purpose? And how then, using other pedagogical approaches to link back to it. For example, the virtual game, let's say virtual lab game. In it, you can, let's say, have an authoring tool. All right? Now, within the authoring tool, the teacher can pose problems. The students among themselves can pose problems, create questions for each one another to solve. All right? So with that, it can lead to what I call even a community of inquiry among the students. Because sometimes we see everything within the game, but how about some extension out from that game? Just a thought. Thank you.
I'll just mention one point over here. So I just mentioned over here as to how the pedagogy would change. And this is a very important thing because if you come across the education that we really apply, it is not of one particular concept. So, also a lot of the scientific research papers have shown that if you approach a concept from multiple nodes and you have an interlinked kind of pedagogy rather than a linear one, you tend to learn much faster. So as Sir rightly mentioned, if we have games designed in that format that you're not just talking about one concept, but through a story you can engage the user and talk about 4 or 5 concepts such that they are linked and it gives a stimulus to thinking as to how I can solve one particular problem in 5 different ways. That would be a much higher sense of learning than really understanding one concept at a time. So that is where I think games can really plug in and propel that factor in amongst us.
So basically from the questions from the audience and our answers, can I safely state that games so far are a tool to empower the education rather than to replace the classical education?
Well, the consensus on the panel seems to be changing the current education system to incorporate games. So you are talking about replacing it, not empowering it. Talking about the current system, replacing the current system.
No, empowering.
Processes change.
Yeah.
Assessment changes, curriculum delivery changes, teacher assessment changes.
I think that just to support what Samir is actually saying, I think the word change or replacing may not be the right word. I think empowering is a better word, or it's the right word, only because if you take out the teacher, then nothing, so it really empowers education, and so essentially the education doesn't change. Maybe the way curriculum is delivered or designed changes, yes, that will change.
So you see, you're talking about changing a system, because you're talking about system-wide change. You're talking about changing the training that teachers receive. You're talking about the resources that they have in the classroom. You're talking about the whole management of the ecosystem of the infrastructure that the school has to support that change.
Yeah.
And therefore, you are actually talking about a deep-seated institutional-wide change in the educational body just to use the new medium for education.
Well, research has shown that this type of change has gone on for a long time. So from the days where we used to use the stone tablets, and then we went on to a new medium, and a new medium, and a new medium, and so this change has happened. And it will always happen. It will evolve. Yeah.
No, but here you're talking about a pedagogical split. I think I'm sure that professors talk about, you're talking about a pedagogical split from instructivist to constructivist, from constructivist to problem-based learning, from problem-based learning to scenario-based learning, to game-based learning. Yeah. And there is several, from the teacher training channel.
Yeah, I think if you look at the nature of game-based learning, it's not far from the constructivist approach. And if you look at, I only speak for Singapore's educationals in terms of teacher training and all that. I think most of them have actually over the last few years been trained towards a more constructivist approach.
Yeah, I think Siddharth, you mentioned a very important area here is that the role of teaching will change drastically. Rather than being a provider of information, it becomes a facilitator, a collaborator. And I think this will continue to change, right? I mean, if you look back in the early days, during the caveman days, right, there were teachers around actually to teach the young kids how to hunt, how to kill dinosaurs. Today, we have teachers who are doing the same, right? Still teaching kids how to do certain things and be a success in life, right? But the role of the teacher will change, and I think this will not certainly affect the way learners will continue to learn the content and solve problems in that nature. So yes, by all means, I think if you are a teacher, don't expect yourself to be standing up in the classroom teaching for the next 5 to 10 years. I think your role will change. You'll be a game developer. You'll be engaging learners out of the classroom. You'll be teaching online as well. There were very good cases of professors from Stanford and MIT who are so good in the classroom, decided to give up their classroom job and become online instructors. And they made a lot more money doing that than standing in the classroom. So yes, I think your role will change, and change a lot.
I'll just bring across one point. We were also talking about measuring the improvements that a child has gone through. Now, at a very elementary level, we use it through tests mentioning how much score one child has got. But going ahead with so much data being generated through various analytical tools, the teacher would have to be much more smarter in terms of assessing if a particular cluster of students who are scoring, say, 10, what do they do after taking a particular quiz or a particular module. So see, from a long-term perspective, I personally see that the teacher's role would also integrate a lot of the data scientist's role, wherein rather than just teaching, she would also have to see how various interventions are really changing the entire understanding of the student and whether it is really working or not. Right now, we are talking about introducing things which will probably get into the system, and then we will hope for it to get better. But once you plug in analytics, we would have really statistical information which will point out that this particular intervention has worked, this has not worked, and what can be really taken forward.
Thank you. Now, I have an interesting question from one of the audience. The competitive nature of games might cause students to be too focused on opposing others to win. Because of this, they might forget how to be supportive of each other outside of lessons plan. How can we counter that? Well, I'm not answering, I'm just restating. Games are competitive, and this is what we want. And this is how we can get players to play the game, like what score did you get, who's first, who's second, who's third. But also, as a teacher in school, we try to teach the student also to cope together. So, who would like to?
Sorry, I'm being very talkative this morning, right? But I think this is also one of my areas that I looked into a lot, right? In games, right, there are actually two axes to observe, two axes, X and a Y. Right? On the Y side is the interaction. How do you interact with this particular lesson? On the X is engagement. How do you solve problems? Now, if the game is just focusing on interaction, for example, shooting and killing some object or some character, right, then there's no real engagement in terms of problem solving. So if the person is focused on such a game, just shooting and killing, right, chances are he'll be quite a perverted person, all right? But if you look at the engagement part, if there's a lot of engaging challenges, there are a lot of problem solving, a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication, then this person is going to be a better developed person. And he can actually survive better in the world, right? As opposed to a game that is purely shooting and killing. So when you're a game-based designer, especially educational games, you need to work on these two aspects, interaction and engagement, and push towards high interaction and high engagement in order that students are not going to fall into the trap like this, like being too focused on winning and not collaborating.
Yeah, I think it's also dependent on the design of the game, because obviously some game mechanics, reward survival, stuff like this is, it's part of the game. But you of course could incorporate game mechanics which reward collaboration.
Okay, so my next point, it might be controversial a bit. DigiPen is known as one of the first officially accredited educational institutions to offer degrees in game development, from engineering to computer science to fine arts. As a matter of fact, we use the games the opposite way. We are highly academic, highly, more than what students would imagine. We are highly academic, and we use games as an example to teach how to develop them. That was successful for us. For example, when I'm teaching a topic in computer science or in physics or in math, I don't need to work hard to find an example in order to engage a student. All what I need is to find out one of the latest, hottest games they play, pick an example of that game and tell them, well, you know what? The concepts we're learning today allows us to do that feature in the game. And as a matter of fact, we don't use games at all. We teach them how to make games. Now, in this lecture, for example, if I'm looking at what we have, thanks to my friend over there, we have an iPad where I can look at the questions. We have another iPad that was used to take notes. We have our iPhones or smartphones where we can check our mails and chat and tweet and whatever. We have projections and. So basically, how can we use this technology to enhance? And is the idea to replace education with games, or try to find what is the positive experience out of games and trying to take only that portion and bring it to the classroom? From my point of view, games are fun. Maybe we should allow the students to play games from time to time in the classroom, because like we all agreed, they're time consuming. However, we can take the advantage of simulation to show examples whenever it's right to do so. We can use the idea of technology to have, instead of having a classroom of 30 or 40 students working together, to have all Singaporean students working together. They can compete against each other, positively, of course. They can exchange, they can exchange their knowledge, and we can use technology for that. One of the items we use in games is ego. We want you to win some points. Our biggest hurdle is to try to convince you that by collecting coins, you will get a higher score and you will feel happy. So once we do that, you keep playing the game and you want more and more and more. Now basically, what we can do in education, we can do the same. But for questions in class, for answering, for participating. I know, for example, earliest in forums, in any types of forums, they would rank the subscriber of the forum by how many questions they asked and how many questions they answered. That alone, if we bring it to the classroom, it will positively entice the students to cooperate more together, to ask questions to each other and to the teachers too. Anyway, so again, I go back to my question. Should we use games as is, or extract from the games the engaging, the empowering, to allow much more students to communicate together, to remove the physical boundaries, and to allow technology to help us too?
What we can do is that there are certain games which are played all by yourself, but there are certain concepts that, like we've seen in the past as well, wherein you're actually on a quest, wherein there are people contributing towards adding up to your goals, and that is how you work collaboratively. Now, if we can, I'm sure that the current pedagogy that we're working on, wherein the exams are given by one individual, that is also changing in some sense because you have project work wherein you work as teams. Now, if you can extend that same analogy to games, wherein rather than just playing alone and having high score, you have some elements which are going to be contributed by your team, so that you are collaboratively playing towards one particular goal. And then once you've achieved that, then you can get your points and similar things. Now, that would eliminate the the fear that we have that it is going to be an individual thing, it will just spur competition and not like promote collaboration. But if such quest-like games are designed, then you would automatically see people doing their part and also contributing to the other, the collective goal of a team. Now, this analogy is important because going forward, when the same children are going to work for organizations, they are not going to be competing alone. They'll be competing in teams, and such kind of a culture will actually help the organizations as well. So you're actually building a very strong workforce right from the beginning.
I have a question. Sorry, you mentioned that DigiPen doesn't use games. For teaching? This is a very interesting point. You would be in the forefront of adopting serious games. That would be the assumption. You all know games best. Why? What stops you from using them? Those are the things that I just want you to sort of kind of elaborate. What are stopping you from using games in the classroom? What's stopping DigiPen using games in the classroom?
Because you see, developing games is highly scientific, artistic, and from the design point of view, etc. Now, games are fun. And when we build games, we pretty much rely on that slow learning curve, that slowly we make you happy. As a matter of fact, as a game developer, our job is to deceive the player, to make them believe that they're doing good. Do you think when you're playing a racing game and you crash, you still have the chance to win the race? Seriously. One crash and it's over. However, what we do, you crash once, we slow down the other cars for you. So games are made to trick you. So from that point, there is no education. You crash once, twice, 3 times, and you still get first at the end. It can't be. In Mario Kart, if you're first the first 2 laps, we give the second or third player the Bowser missile that will hunt you down, explode you, and you're not first anymore. Because you're already happy. You were first the first 2 laps. Now the second or third got to be first, and whoever is second is third is also happy too. Now, using games for that, it's not education. Now, the way we use games are as an example. If I want to teach physics, it's very easy for me to pick many games, pick an instance of a lot of games. And I tell the students, you see that special effect that you saw over there, how that character was able to pick the weapon or the missile, how it was fired, then they would get a lot of attention. When we're teaching artificial intelligence, when we're teaching linear algebra, trigonometry, geometry, it's easy. However, we're using game examples. We're not asking them to play games. As a matter of fact, when our students enter, we tell them, you used to play a lot of games. They waste a lot of time. They make you happy. Now, it's time to reduce your playing a lot, and the only game we will allow you to play from now on is the game that you will do it yourself. So, games is a way to have fun, pass time, and sometimes, depending on the topic, whether it can be simulated effectively, it would be a really good medium. Now, to answer your question, we do use simulation in our education, but not games. We do use the idea of having 3 main campuses across the world and 5, including the collaboration, that we have all our students working together as one team. Yes, we do that. We do have a forum where everybody can access it, yes. We do have questions that can be posed between content from one continent to another continent, but to play game, to teach them a topic, no.
Just something I could extract from your note there. So when it comes to introducing a new concept or explaining it, you'd rather not use games per se, but probably use them as examples if required. But some of the examples which were earlier quoted involved actually assimilating or applying what you've already learned mixing and matching, taking risk, experimenting it in a game scenario simulation with lesser risk. So in the practice mode, application mode, you'd rather have more games rather than someone coming and explaining something. Is that the bifurcation that is coming out of the discussion?
Well, basically, I agree with you. Games should be used, personally, I would say games should be used as a hybrid solution. I don't think they should replace the classical way of teaching, because a teacher reads the class. When I'm speaking to you, I read your eyes. And depending on the reaction, I might change the topic, I might change whatever I'm saying. If we have a game, until the game starts reacting that quickly and that intelligently, they won't be able to replace the teacher. Now, as a hybrid solution, in order to help the teacher delivering the content, I say yes, 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 and yes, and 1,000 times yes.
What we are actually discussing is that the gaming industry has evolved into games and gamification, right? The new word that is now getting hyped is the gamification, where it's just using the gaming techniques or the mechanics only as it is required. Like in some corporate settings or schools, it can be just giving the leaderboard or the badges, like you were discussing just for promoting the discussion. And at some level, it can go to the simulation level, where the entire education is done on, based on the simulation that you are doing. So I believe that the serious learning will be a good combination of gamification. It will be as minimal as just a leaderboard, just a badges, just points. So somewhere the right adoption is somewhere between these two things. We should not think education only for games. There's just some gamification mechanics which are being used in health and everything. Maybe we should consider the point of gamification of not only games.
I'd like to hear Inder.
On the same point.
On this issue.
Okay, like even he mentioned, there's one thing that we are probably restricting ourselves to as to what a game is. Now, a game is not an application that is running on an electronic device. When I'm talking about a game which is including pedagogy, you can have a game running in phases in the background, and you have a teacher who is giving the main stimulus on this thing as to what each step is for and where you need to do what. Now, in this sense, you come out that construct that a game is running on a computer to something like a classroom which is involved in a game. Part of it is digital, part of it is being given the stimulus by the teacher, and that is how you actually engage the entire audience. So we'll have to think in that perspective that a game is not a device-restricted entity. It's more of how you engage an audience and how the teacher actually plays the more important role of providing the stimulus in the entire setup. So if the way we are thinking is that we're going to replace the entire curriculum and everything, that certainly won't happen. Because the teacher is the one who's going to be giving you the stimulus as to what is to be done next, what this actually means and everything. And that is where the entire thing about gamification and even games would come in, because I think where the gentleman pointed out is that even if the teacher takes some, if she provides some stimulus or she's taking some intervention, at the end of the day, even she wants to know how it's working out. That is where gamification can come in. And I think the overall thinking about what a game is and how you can engage the classroom in a game has to go out from the electronic perspective to a more holistic perspective, wherein the teacher gives the stimulus and you have a digital aid which is helping her.
Very interesting question of the board. How do you deal with a situation where a player understands the subject matter but cannot play the game well? Here's on the board. Somebody's very interesting question.
Okay, I think this question links to the earlier discussion about whether games should replace everything in the classroom, right? Now, according to my understanding is that in every curriculum that we develop, there's always content to be delivered. There's always knowledge to be delivered. And at the end of the day, you need to apply all this content and knowledge to solve some problem. Now, the game will come in when you need to apply the knowledge to solve some problem. So, for example, if you are going to be learning about forensic science, right, there's a lot of content to learn. There are a lot of instruments to learn. But you need to solve a crime. That's why you apply all your skills, all your knowledge, right, to solve this problem. Now, that's where the game will come in, right? But the earlier part has to be done in the classroom environment. as much as you can, or out of the classroom to other ways of learning. It could be e-learning objects. It could be self-paced learning content, right? But when you need to apply all this learning to solve the problem, then the game will come in very nicely. So you set up a scenario with a crime scene, with all the evidence everywhere in the room, and you apply what you learn about forensic science to solve this problem. Then the gaming part will really kick in and serve its purpose. So in one sentence, gaming does not solve everything in the classroom, but yes, quite a place to play, especially when you need to apply this knowledge in a safe environment. And that's really the important point, a safe environment. Right? We're going to create an environment in the 3D world. We're going to create all these evidences. We're going to create all these scenarios. Let them apply what they learn and solve this problem. I think that's where it becomes more meaningful to the learners.
Thank you.
Yeah. One question. We know we've got a lot of kind of players, girls, guys, different. Some like FPS, some like the strategy games. Casual gamer, hardcore gamer, things like that. And my question is, how can we manage to do games for education that we are sure all the players will adopt, will play with them? Because the goal is to use the fun of the game to make them learn, because we think it's fun and they would like to learn with it. But if it's an FPS, and I don't like FPS.
Well, let me add more to your question, make it even harder. Suppose we develop the game that everyone liked it. For how long they will like it? Usually kids change games every few weeks. So do we have to keep developing every, so basically I'm joining him to ask you. And let me know that we still have only a few minutes left.
So I think two quick things. Just like gamers, learners are the same. There is no one size fits all for all learners. So, and similarly, if you made me play, I'm an FPS person, so if you made me play MapleStory, I will really struggle. And that's a reality. That's a reality. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we still have few last minute, basically. To conclude, the example that our colleague Inder gave at the beginning, for me, it's a perfect example how we can enrich our classical education. So we have our teacher. They will always remain there. We will have our boards, whether they're chalk, digital, or whatever, they will always remain there. And now we can add a bit of spices to our education by having simulations. Sometimes it comes under the form of games, whenever it's logical and reasonable to have the student compete or to reach a high score. Sometimes we can have the students all work together to have a high score for their school. And this is basically how I would suggest to have an effective usage in games. Now, whether we would like to replace the content or whether we would like to use games to metric and give grades to students based on games, that I don't know about it. If I was one of the government authority, it would be too hard to convince me that games would do that. Wow. Everybody agrees? Okay, well, thank you for listening. Thank you for all your questions.